As you move from the Odyssey to the Aeneid, you will be moving from an unconscious epic to a conscious epic. When Homer composed the Iliad and the Odyssey, he was probably not aware of the fact that he was writing a textbook that would be read for thousands and thousands of years. Virgil, on the other hand, was completely aware, consciously aware, that he was writing an epic that would be studied by college and even grammar school children for the next 2,000 years. Now, in sitting down to write his conscious epic, the Aeneid, Virgil had a very difficult task. On the one hand, he needed to write a Homeric epic that would take place in the absolute heroic mythic past of the Iliad and the Odyssey. He would need to confine his epic to that mythic space of Odysseus' journey. And yet, that was not enough. The Aeneid was a commission work. Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire, actually commissioned Virgil to write a Homeric epic that celebrated Rome and all that Rome stood for. Well, the trouble with that is, how are you able to celebrate the history of Rome while yet maintaining and keeping your epic in the absolute heroic past of Homer? What I'd like to discuss in this video is the ingenious solution that Virgil came up with to accomplish both goals at the same time. This is how he did it. He made sure that his Aeneid remained in the same mythic time frame as the Odyssey. In fact, most of the Aeneid overlaps, chronologically speaking, with the journeys of Odysseus. And yet, Virgil found innumerable ingenious ways to teach us the history of Rome while never leaving the world of the Odyssey. He does that most spectacularly in Book 1, Book 6, and Book 8. In Book 1, Venus, the goddess mother of Aeneas, goes to her father Jupiter or Zeus and begs him to help her son Aeneas to escape from Troy and to build a new city that would become Rome. In response, Jupiter promises Venus that he's got everything under control. And over maybe 50 lines of poetry, he lays out in terms of a prophecy the entire history of Rome, stretching from Aeneas to Augustus, a period of over 1,000 years. And he mentions things like Romulus and Remus and other events and names famous from the history of Rome. In Book 6, Virgil gets even more ingenious. In Book 6, Aeneas visits the underworld, just as Odysseus does in Book 11, and there he meets the ghost of his father. And at the very moment he meets his father, Anchises, Aeneas' father, is reviewing a group of souls that will one day be reincarnated in the bodies of the great heroes of Rome to come. And so, as Anchises surveys the souls, he, like Jupiter, gives us a miniature history of Rome and all of the highlights. Finally, in Book 8, Venus asks her husband Vulcan, Hephaestus, to build Aeneas a suit of armor and a shield to protect him. Well, just as Achilles has a famous shield in the Iliad, so Aeneas has a shield in the Aeneid. But there's a difference. In the Iliad, the shield of Achilles has on it two cities embodying two different choices of peace and war. Not so on the shield of Aeneas. As you might guess, on the shield of Aeneas, Vulcan engraves yet again the entire history of Rome. And at the very center of the shield, he puts the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. That is the naval battle during which Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra and paved the way for his becoming Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire. But that is not the only way that Virgil included the history of Rome in the mythic world of Homer. In the Aeneid, Virgil employs what is known as etiology. Etiology. Etiology is the study of the origin of things. In the history of Rome, there were two great events that almost destroyed Rome before the empire was born. The first was the Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage. The second was the series of civil wars that included Julius Caesar and led up to Caesar Augustus defeating Antony and Cleopatra. What Virgil does in the Aeneid is find ways to give us a mythic origin for these historical events. When you read Book 4, the tragic story of Aeneas and Dido, the queen of Carthage, you need to understand that when Aeneas leaves Dido, breaking Dido's heart and causing her to commit suicide, that turns out to be the ideological cause for the Punic Wars. For before she dies, Dido lays down a curse that her progeny and that of Aeneas will be eternal enemies. And she even calls for an avenger to rise out of her blood. That avenger turns out to be Hannibal, the one who almost destroyed the Roman Republic. Later on, you'll read in the second half of the Aeneid of a series of civil wars between Aeneas and Turnus, one of the great princes of Italy. That story is a tragic story in the mode of the Iliad, Achilles versus Hector, but it also foreshadows and gives us a sort of mythical reason for why there was a series of civil wars in later Rome that led up to the establishment of the Roman Empire. If I were to write a Virgilian epic about the battle or ongoing fight between the Arabs and the Jews in Palestine, I would write a Virgilian epic in which I tell a story about Isaac and Ishmael, the two children of Abraham, who are the fathers of the Jews and the Arabs. So I would show that story from the Old Testament as giving the cause for something that would happen thousands of years later. Finally, and I'll only give you one example, what Virgil does again and again is he gives us little stories where it turns out that something that happens in the time frame of Aeneas gives an origin for something that happens in Rome. The best example is Book 2, The Fall of Troy. I hope you'll read that carefully. You will see that when the ghost of Hector tells Aeneas that he must leave Troy and found a new place, that will be Rome, he gives him a series of what are called lares and penates, household gods, to take with him. Well, guess what? The ancient Trojans did not worship household gods like the lares and penates. It was, in fact, the Romans of Virgil's day that did that. And so what Virgil is doing here is showing us that in the mythic past of Homer is the true origin of cultural items that are historical in the time of Virgil and Caesar Augustus. I hope you will enjoy this very self-conscious epic and marvel at how Virgil is able to combine myth and history so seamlessly.